Hello and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. My name is Ron Rogers with Ahead. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Vijay Venkatesan, Chief Data Officer at Horizon Blue Cross and Blue Shield. Welcome, Vijay.
Thank you, Ron. Good morning as well.
A lot of exciting stuff going on around AI and data and analytics in healthcare in general, but specifically to the payer space. I look forward to this conversation. I appreciate you taking the time, Vijay.
Well, thank you, Ron, and I'm looking forward to it. I know that, this is a pretty hot topic, not only just in healthcare, but across all industries. And I know specifically in healthcare, there's going to be a lot more discussions around what's the best way to apply it, a responsible way to do it. So I'm looking forward to the dialogue today.
Great, thank you. I think that cues up a pretty good first topic, Vijay. There is a lot of dialogue. I talk to multiple plans every week. AI is always on top of the menu, but there's I don't want to say a resistance. There seems to be barriers to entry. So how do you see those barriers, and what do you see the industry doing to overcome them?
Yes, I mean, as you pretty well are aware, healthcare is a very regulated industry. And I think whenever there is the regulation, I think there's generally a tendency to be risk averse. And as you think about the topic of risk, I think a lot of the focus typically has been around how do you manage risk and what are the right ways to create the right framework around risk. So, a lot of the discussions around this topic of AI in general has been all about what is the governance model that we need. So, a lot of focus is instead of starting with what typically people do is use cases, we say, let's start about, what's the right governing model? Is there a new framework we need for AI governance? Is that akin to a data governance model, or is that somewhat unique? And how do we ensure that those things are occurring in an organization where the appetite for its use is pretty high, but there isn't a framework by which we evaluate use cases and so on? So I think in regulated industries, and specifically in healthcare and more from a health plan point of view, I think the focus is going to be on starting with governance.
Yeah, I think great point. I appreciate that background as well. With that said, a lot of within the payer space, claims-based processing systems are, for the most part, primarily 1970s sort of client-server applications where security and governance was really around the net, right? Yeah. So everything was stopped at the network, where there was not a lot of application security throughout, RBAC roles, things like that. How are you overcoming that? Obviously you're going to move that to an EDL before it's usable, but how do you strategize in overcoming those obstacles?
Yeah, I would say like over the years, I think most health systems have done a pretty good job of what I call a more of a role-based approach to security, having RBAC models that are pretty solidified and in place, making sure that the minimum necessary requirements and PHI, PII, all of those are incorporated, not just from a data point from a data perspective, but also from an application point of view. So but I think what the Gen AI discussions and AI discussions in general, I think, lend itself to is this construct of what is considered public data, what's private data, how do you cross the public-private chasm, how do you think about things like copyrights and all of those aspects. So I think what's happened is with the Gen AI discussions, there is a lot of focus around data itself. As you think about this topic, data is a foundation for it. How do you manage and harness and expose? That's a big component. And then security alongside it. Who gets to see it, who gets to do something with it, and how do we ensure that those aspects are accounted for as well. So I'd say like the application security has come a long way. I think now it's a matter of how do you create the AI security framework, but it's not more about, what are the benefits of AI, but also what can AI, influence in terms of harm, if you will. And that's part of the dialogue that we're having.
Right. And so, Vijay, where do you see sort of the breakdown between use cases between foundational and Gen AI? Gen AI it's sort of the shiny penny, but but at the end of the day, there's a lot of foundational elements to Gen AI, especially in regards to healthcare.
Yeah, and I think the way we look at it is that we think of AI, Gen AI, all of this as like tools in a toolbox, right? So there isn't like a one thing that fits all. So we used to say, talk about BI, CI, DI. Now we're talking about EI, FI, GI. It's like the acronyms keep coming on, the capabilities keep coming on. So to me, it's about tools in a toolbox. And then what organizations have to get very adept at is saying that what's the right tool to apply for a particular business problem, and what's the value of solving the problem in the context of whether that's member experience, whether that's operational excellence or improvement or optimization, and for business transformation, right? So if you think about your use cases in those key categories, then the question becomes is what's the right thing to do? I mean, most health systems today are applying AI in the sense of predictive modeling, whether that's prospective or prescriptive. Those are already happening, and there's an element of responsible AI in that, which is how do we ensure there's no bias in the way you're building models and things like that. But now with the Gen AI discussion, it's a lot more about what data can leave your private domain into public. And if at all we should restrict any public domain, how do we think about large language models? How do we think about its effectiveness, but also its shortcomings in terms of what they term as hallucination? So all of those have to be blended. And so I always think of this as an evolutionary conversation, which is things we do well today, things we can do better tomorrow, and then what's the right tool in the toolbox to apply to it.
Yeah, I like your toolbox analogy. I think for me, the more I have conversations and different plans, it really comes down to what I traditionally call ML or
Right.
ML ops, right? Because that's
Right.
really the foundation of learning to begin with. And you also touched on a couple of different use cases between member experience and operational excellence.
Yeah.
So where do you when I think of operational excellence in a payer, young center, right? There's a lot of use cases, redundant activities. Where do you see use cases improving efficiencies and improving member service?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I think one of the things that we see from an operational excellence is kind of reimagining our IT function itself, right? So if you think about how do I reimagine IT help desk of tomorrow, where can I use intelligent bots, and how does that either enhance the experience that our customers have with our own internal functions like IT, but also how does it streamline the help desk functions? So I think there's a lot of opportunity to what I call the mundane and repeatable functions where you can really apply the power of algorithms to be able to streamline, enhance, and simplify. So that's one we are looking at, saying how do we reimagine a lot of the IT processes themselves. Things like how do I make a business requirements, create a test plan? How do I update my contracts in a meaningful way? How do I look at my contracts and understand kind of where the concerns are across my various vendor portfolio that I have? So a lot of what I call process improvements that lends itself to simplification or reducing friction. From a member experience, a lot of the questions we typically field are around, their benefits. Is there a way, instead of printing our benefit handbook in 20 different languages, can I create an intelligent bot that speaks to the member in their language and addresses the question of, is my chiropractor covered? Is my PT services covered? How do I get you there quickly and enhance that member experience? And then the last piece of that is how do I get my call center folks more intelligent in the context of who they're talking to by providing them guided information as the calls are going on. And that requires more of a reskilling, rescripting how an IVR works or a call center works. But those are some of the typical ways we're thinking about member experience, because it can be influencing it in a more direct way, but it can also be through indirect while by enhancing our internal operations and processes.
Right? What about claims adjudication, BJ? Do you see any opportunities there for predictive pending claims? I think LLM is probably a strong candidate, with different tools like Power Automate, things like that for that.
Yeah.
Have you seen any value in those types of use cases?
Yeah, I think the use cases that have come across our desk is more around, can we do something with the prior authorization? Do we have it? If so, how do we do it intelligently? Do we not have it? I know some of the blue plans have said we don't, we're not going to have any prior authorizations. And some have said we will, but we want to make it more efficient and intelligent, and take it away from a facts-based model to something a little bit more dynamic. So I think in the prior auth world, we see, because it all depends on, from a claims adjudication, if your first pass is around 92, 93, 94, the question is, what's the additional 1% really giving me? And is the cost benefit appropriate? So those are some of the questions we're actually going, or having at this point as we speak. But I think I see a lot more around whether that's the denials process or the denials management efficiencies there, whether that's the um, prior auth, as I mentioned, and those type of things. So we're looking at those and saying, are there ways to improve and enhance those?
Awesome. What about eligibility? Do you see use cases there as well?
We haven't come across any where we thought that this could be a right application yet, but it doesn't mean that we won't consider it in the future. But at this point, we've not gotten into where we're saying, is there something we need to do with eligibility today? But I'm sure as we look at the domain of member experience, we have to kind of see what are the member touch points, and then where do we think we can bring the biggest benefit, right? I mean, part of AI is about, do I have data completeness, right? I mean, people forget that AI relies on a very strong data foundation, cloud foundation, and in most health systems today, they are making the journey to cloud, but it's not clear to me whether the cloud journey is a full throttle effort or is it much more of a more incremental effort. So I always remind people that when we think about this topic of AI in general, make sure your cloud and your infrastructure is solid. You have a strong data foundation, you have a strong governance, so that you can then manage the use cases at scale. Because a lot of people can do a lot of POCs and targeted use cases, but if you want to industrialize it and scale it, that's a difficult conversation, because that requires both what I call the organizing principles around, what's the funding model? Is it CapEx, OpEx? Is it, do I have the right governing framework for approval of use cases? Is the privacy, security, compliance part of the approval process? How do you think about it at scale? And that's where we are. We are trying to now take it from what I call a POC to production in an industrialized way.
Awesome. Vijay, I really appreciate your time. This has been enlightening for me. It's been a pleasure meeting you. It's great to hear your thoughts on the industry, especially around data and analytics. And again, I appreciate your time and I appreciate you joining me today. Please visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews.
Thank you very much, Ron. Enjoyed the conversation as well.
Thank you, sir.